Welcome to Planting Knowledge, Growing Success, a pioneer webinar series produced by the Southeast Minnesota Pioneer Agronomy Team. I'm field agronomist Jay Zilski in North Mankato, and joining me today on this first of the webinar series is my colleague to the east, Josh Schaffner.
Thanks, Jay. So thanks for joining everyone. And today's webinar is episode 1 of a 6-part series that'll be hosted by your local Pioneer team. And at the end of the slideshow today, we'll share that calendar and list of topics and when you can tune in and expect to see us more this summer. So today's topic is really around Enlist success and making that successful as you get ready to make your post applications, whether that be in Enlist E3 soybeans or in your corn. And I think it's important to look back at just how rapidly the Enlist weed control system has grown across Minnesota. And here's just a calendar, like looking at our progress from the Pioneer standpoint. And really, it was kind of in 2021 when we started to see our uptick. And if some of you remember that summer, it's also when we hosted our Enlist executive sites, where a lot of you got to come out in field as we had these in our territories and see the system in a small plot and what it can do for you. And once you all saw that in 2021, we went from maybe having a third of our sales being Enlist right up to like 80–90%, and we've been there ever since. And today, Enlist E3 is the #1 weed control system in the U.S., and it's approximately on around 65% of the soybean acres across the country. And when you look back at why that success has been there, first off, there is a great picture of that Enlist executive site I referenced back in 2021. But really, it boils down to, we deliver unmatched crop safety, the near zero volatility. That's something we talked about really heavily when we launched this, and that is held true today. I think when you look at how we promoted Enlist, educated you about it, everything we talked about, how it will work and what it would do in field, has really panned out to be the way we educated that and talked about it from day one. And then that flexibility to be able to tank mix with glufosinate, use dry ammonium sulfate in these applications. These are all things that have given you tools to have the most powerful weed control system for some of those tough weeds that we deal with in soybean production in Minnesota.
And regardless of the production system in soybeans, whether it be E3 Enlist or any of the other systems out there, it's always important to start out with a solid foundation of a pre. And on this slide, you can see illustration of a field location comparing and contrasting where a pre was used ahead of E3 Enlist soybeans compared to no pre. And in addition to maximizing the yield by reducing that early season weed competition, it improves the effectiveness of those post-herbicide applications. If you look real close at this slide, you can see even where there was a pre, there still were a few tall waterhemp plants that had come through that pre. But if you compare that to where there was no pre applied, where we have some aggressively growing tall waterhemp potentially shading out and impacting the effectiveness of those post-herbicide applications. In addition to that, it also buys time in the event of weather delays. And of course, we haven't had any of those this year, have we? Whether it be strong winds or heavy rainfall events. And so you also weatherproof that system and buy yourself some time. And then finally, the thing we need to be aware of is that it's an important tool to manage against the development of resistant weeds. Now that we've established the importance of that pre, let's talk a bit about application rates for Enlist and E3 soybeans. And, if we start talking, we'll start talking first about weed height. And, general recommendation overall is that with Enlist in soybeans, we can control weeds up to 6 inches in tall. But if we're targeting tall water hemp, it's important that we get on it early. And 4-inch tall water hemp is the optimum stage by which we want to have sprayed Enlist for tall water hemp. 4 inches, as is illustrated on the little ruler on the right-hand side of the screen, means 4 inches. And so rates with Enlist 1 would be 2 pints. There's one simple and easy to remember rate. That's 2 pints per acre. Or with Enlist Duo, which is the premix of Enlist and glyphosate, it would be 4.75 pints. As Josh mentioned earlier, we talk about crop safety. And really, I like what we see with the Enlist production system as far as crop safety up to and really include up to that R2 growth stage. With Enlist alone, or when tank mixed with post-residual herbicides, or apply up to the R1 growth stage in a tank mixed with an improved glufosinate product.
Yeah, so kind of transitioning from the rates and use rates of Enlist, also really important as we start talking about getting out there and applying it. Obviously having the right nozzle is extremely important, and also our right carrier volumes is important too. One thing we'll share out the link here for the approved nozzles list, and it is extremely important to make sure we have the right nozzles that we can get, number one, the right carrier volume, the right pressure, the right droplet size. Because one thing, when we do think back to when we were spraying dicamba on soybeans, we were using ultra coarse droplet sizes, which the graphic on the right here, you can see where the ultra coarse is of like what does 10 gallons per acre look like compared to 20 gallons per acre. Those large droplet sizes, do reduce the amount of coverage we get. And we don't want to be using those when we're spraying Enlist. So we want to have something that's a little bit more fine, reference that list, and they'll get you dialed in. Now, the second part about this that's really important once you get the right nozzle tip is at Pioneer, our local agronomists, we do suggest using no less than 15 gallons per acre of water when spraying Enlist or Enlist tank mixes. However, when we do spray that with glufosinate, we do want to be at 20 gallons when we are using Liberty, or excuse me, glufosinate plus Enlist in that tank mix combination. And when you do look at the coverage cards there again too, when you kind of look at just the coarse nozzle size at 15 or 10 gallons per acre, you come down and compare that to 20 gallons per acre. That is a massively different coverage pattern that we're getting when we increase that water carrier volume. Now, when you think about that specifically to water hemp is a very challenging weed for us to control. And on the picture here, the photos, we got three different size water hemp plants here. We got a 2-inch, a 3 to 4-inch water hemp, and then a 4 to 6-inch. One thing that's unique about water hemp and why it's so hard for us to control is when we spray water hemp, we have to get coverage and kill every growing point. So like on this 2-inch water hemp, every little box that we have on that is a growing point. So when you look at a water hemp plant, every little branch or node we consider a growing point. And if we don't get coverage on every growing point to get the chemistry there to get it controlled, we will struggle. So when you think about a 2-inch water hemp, we have 9 growing points. When you go to 3 to 4-inch, 14 growing points. When you go to 4 to 6-inch, we have 18 growing points. So you think about, having that 15, 20 plus gallons per acre, that's what allows us to get the coverage and will give us good control of water hemp each time we're out there making applications.
Josh, that's an excellent point that you highlighted there, and it really demonstrates the importance of catching those tall water hemp when they're in that ideal range, 2 to 4 inch height, before we increase that number of growing points. And certainly, additives are an important part of the program as well, Josh, aren't they?
Yeah, they sure are. And to kind of just going through the 3 bullet points there, one thing about drift control agents, something that was commonly used in today's application world. Colex D is already formulated into Enlist, so we don't necessarily require additional drift control agents. So in most cases, we don't recommend the addition of those when using Enlist herbicides. Now, when you do start thinking of oils, extremely important, whether that be, COC, crop oil concentrate, or MSO, we do recommend a gallon per 100 of gallons of water when spraying Enlist herbicides. Now, again, that choice between COC and MSO, that's going to be very environmental. If we have some really tough conditions, maybe we're going to look at using MSO over COC, but we've seen really good results by using both of them. Now, the other thing, if we are using, say, like a layered residual, such as an Ever Pre-X or like herbicide group 15, and we're in really good spray conditions where we got, maybe sunny days, high temperatures, we do usually recommend then bringing these oil rates down to 50%, so around that half a gallon per 100, just to try to reduce some of the crop response and speckling that we can get from having maybe a little too much oil in those solutions spray combinations. And then when we are spraying glufosinate, we always want to be using 3 to 4 pounds of dry ammonium sulfate per acre. I know there are some approved partners, maybe outside of that, but we're always going to suggest using kind of those old heavy 50-pound bags. That's just going to give us the best water conditioner and give you the best weed control for that application trip.
Now, the best way to build on the strengths of Enlist alone is the selection of a tank mix partner. And Josh referred to the importance of considering a Group 15 as a layered residual product. And that's really the next logical step to supplement the solid foundation of the pre that we talked about earlier. And so if we look at some examples of key Corteva products, new Inversa, which is an encapsulated acetylchlor product, the rate as a tank mix partner with Enlist would be 3 pounds, 3 pints, or in the case of EverPreX, 1.0 to 1.33 pints. And you can see on the screen here just the difference that having a pre followed by a post-applied residual, such as a Group 15 layered residual, compare that to a single post application with a single mode of action. And recent research from University of Wisconsin is really stressing the importance of the optimum timing of that layered residual being by the 15th of June. There's a gap right around the end of June and early July, where maybe your pre has kind of begun to fade in its efficacy a little bit, and the layered residual is intended to bridge that gap through canopy closure. And so by applying by the 15th of June, you ensure that you have adequate opportunity to get a significant rainfall event to activate that Group 15. Next up, as we look at tank mix considerations, it's choosing your partner to control volunteer corn and other grasses in E3 Enlist soybeans. And so many of you as Pioneer customers are already utilizing Enlist-enabled corn. So it's important that you choose carefully your tank mix partner for volunteer corn control in E3 Enlist soybeans. And so clethodim is an excellent choice. And as we look at the tank mix with clethodim and Enlist, it's important that you increase that rate a third to a half higher to ensure that you get best control of that volunteer corn in your E3 soybeans. Now, Enlist plus glufosinate is a lights out treatment. And I think it's important to note that for close to 25 years in traded corn, farmers have had the ability to apply Liberty to those traded products, many of those traded products, and yet glufosinate, the active ingredient in Liberty, never really took off because it kind of works banker's hours. And, it needs sunshine and warm weather, works best between 9 and 5, actually maybe closer to 9 to 3. And when you tank mix Enlist plus glufosinate, the active ingredient in Liberty, it is just a lights out treatment. You can see illustrated on the screen alone where, okay, Enlist alone doesn't cover all of the potential weeds out there. You'll notice there may be a few escape grasses. If you look at glufosinate alone, doesn't control all the weeds. There's some broadleaves that have escaped. But if you look at the Enlist plus glufosinate tank mix, it's an outstanding treatment. And again, those reminders about AMS, 3 to 4 pounds of dry AMS, using that oil, and then also the importance of that carrier volume, 20 gallons per acre minimum to get optimum coverage so we can kill all of those growing points on those tall water hemp plants.
Yeah, and that's the main reason why Enlist plus glufosinate is quickly becoming the #1 tank mix partner with Enlist J because of that great control. So, as we kind of continue to go through the slides here, obviously we talked about, the rates of Enlist to be successful, make sure we got the right nozzles, the carrier rate, what, the foundation of a tank mix partners. Kind of the final step of this when it comes to being successful with Enlist is also the mixing order. And it's something, Jay, you and I have been giving out a lot of postcards of this. And if you see this webinar, reach out to us. We have a lot of great information on this. But the mixing order is really important when it comes down to spraying Enlist with other partners. And sometimes when you do, you may be getting some mixing orders from your provider or seen some in the past. And this might look a little different for a couple reasons, and I'll go through it. But just like anytime we're spraying most herbicides, we're always going to condition the water first. So we always want our dry ammonium sulfate in the tank first. And then from there, we're going to move into our Enlist products, whether it be in this case, it's usually going to be Enlist One, in rare cases, Enlist Duo. And this is where it's going to look a little bit different. A lot of times when you'd see some of the mixing orders of the past, we might then roll into our second broadleaf mode of action product, whether it be glyphosate or glufosinate. But in this case, this is where we're going to separate those out. And the reasons we're going to the post-residual and then clethodim is we don't want the raw chemistry of Enlist One coming in direct contact with glyphosate or glufosinate. So the reason we separate them out is, if one's going in the deductor, we don't want the raw chemicals to touch. We're going to put some other products between there to make sure that we get the most amount of activity and the most control out of that application window. So extremely important. And then obviously, like anytime we go through that, we're always going to finish with our oils last and then top off the rest of the tank with water carrier. But really important steps here. And like I said, we have a lot of resources we'll share at the end of the webinar to help make sure you got the right mixing order for your operation. So Jay, we spent a lot of time talking about Enlist E3 soybeans. You did reference as Enlist-enabled corn has really came out in a big way, especially for the 2025 growing season. That will continue to expand as we move on to 2026 and beyond. And we've talked a lot about this, Jay, the last year as we were getting ready for this. Enlist-enabled corn, it's really all about three words, that being yield, protection, and flexibility. And then we also add an alternative with FOP tolerance in that corn. Kind of gives you another option for grass control, or maybe a corn weed control program that doesn't include glyphosate, which is some nice flexibility to kind of change up some mode of actions there as well. When you think about the flexibility side of that, we offer a very wide application window. We can spray over the top up to 30-inch corn. I think our colleague Steve Hubley there, he was kind of showing that flexibility there in that board where you can kind of see the top of his blue line. That's that 30-inch tall corn. Where on the bottom there, the red, that's kind of our standard 11 to 12-inch corn, which a lot of herbicides hit their label where we have to be wrapped up by then. But a lot of great flexibility with that. And I think the other thing, it does give you some new tools around field edge management. We'll share the link there. I shot a really nice video at our innovation site last year discussing some of the utilities of that as well. And when you do think about field edges or borders, Jay, I always talk a lot about when, say when we ride in the combine in the fall, right? When we're out in the middle of an 80, we usually don't see many weeds when we're riding the combine. But if we do see weeds riding, they're usually on the outside 10 to 20 feet. And I would argue that's probably where 85% of our weeds seeds come from on a given year. But when you think about your field edges, if I take 10 feet, which is approximately 4 rows, that's about 1.21 acres for every mile that you have in that scenario. So that does start adding up. And Jay, when I think about some of our contour strip producers to the far east along the Mississippi River, where, because of the terrain, we do contour strip, where we have growers that might have 30, 40 contour strips. They could have 10 to 12 miles of border, and that becomes adds up to be a lot of acres. In the past, without Enlist-enabled corn, we kind of have two choices, right? We either got to stay back to protect the neighboring crop and have 4 or 5 rows of weeds, or we have to kill the neighboring crop to kill the weeds. Where now with Enlist-enabled corn, you open up that Enlist glufosinate tank mix. Maybe once you get done or before you make your last applications, you can go out there and picture frame those edges, or even in non-contour strip situations, the value of picture framing fields is huge, Jay, for long-term weed control. And if you think about it, man, if you only have to mix up 1 tank of glufosinate and Enlist, now I can border my Enlist E3 soybeans, my Enlist-enabled corn, instead of having to have 2 mixes, multiple rinses. This becomes a really efficient thing. So there's a lot of value to that, but that's just kind of some of the outside the box thinking of, hey, we're maybe not going to spray Enlist-enabled corn with Enlist across the board, but how does this give me a new tool to help my long-term weed control for years to come?
Josh, that point about edge management with Enlist-enabled corn is something that I remember when you first mentioned it several years ago. I hadn't even thought about that, and you had an excellent illustration there, just showing how you have the potential value and then the flexibility. If you're already spraying soybeans with Enlist and glufosinate, and you can just do some edge management in the corn. But I'd like to kind of wrap things up now as we close out the webinar. A few key points to remember to help reinforce and help you understand why Enlist has become the dominant weed control system in soybeans. And so, it really comes down to, 5 key points. It's that wide window of application timing. It's tolerance to those 3 key herbicides, ability to use AMS for the best weed control, the fact that it's has low volatility and less drift with that Codex D component of the formulation, and then proven effective weed control. And so as we close out today's webinar, we also want to make you aware of some of the resources available to you through your local Pioneer sales representative. You very likely already have received, as you see in the lower left-hand side of the screen here, our 2025 summer agronomy memo book and resource guide. And there's a section there that highlights some of the key points we already made about the Enlist E3 production system. In addition to that, you'll see on the screen here, we have several postcards. It's actually not several postcards. It's a front and back of a postcard talking about E3 Enlist production system in soybeans and E3 Enlist management in Enlist enabled corn. So I encourage you, if you don't have those resources already, to talk to your local Pioneer sales professional.
All right, Jay, as we kind of wrap up today's webinar on success for Enlist, we also want to kind of just highlight the ones that are coming up here. So around June 16th, we'll have another one on corn and soybean stand assessments. Something we've really taken to the next level, Jay, the last couple of years, and we'll share all that information. July 7th, corn fungicide decision making, always one of the most important windows of decisions that we got to make for corn each year. July 14th, corn rootworm feeding assessments, and we'll wrap up on August 11th talking about crop progress and also maybe some yield estimates and just the state of the crop. So thank you for joining the tips for Enlist success, and we'll see you next time.
That concludes this Pioneer Agronomy video podcast. Visit our page on pioneer.com and follow us on Twitter and Facebook for more agronomy insights.